Hi folks, Thomas Henson here with thomashenson.com, and today we have a very special episode where we're actually going to do an interview with an expert in the deep learning community all around Java. So Kesha Williams, she's going to sit down and we're going to talk about what's going on with Java and deep learning, right? And so we've talked in the past a good bit around, hey, should we use Python? Should we use C++? What about Java and deep learning? So she's actually involved in the community with the Java deep learning community, and she's going to come on and talk about some of how she uses it, her use cases, and her involvement in the community. She's also going to tell you how you can get involved. So if you're interested in getting involved in the deep learning community and specifically around Java, there's a call to action in this. A ton of resources down here in the video description below. So anything that we're talking about in here. I will say, so for this interview, we weren't able to capture video for it, so please still tune in, listen up, and if you have any questions or ideas, make sure you put them in the comment section here below. I'm excited to share this one with you. Without further ado, here we go. Hi folks, so we're excited today to talk to Kesha Williams on the Big Data, Big Questions channel around the MLDL community, and actually we're going to dive into what's going on as far as Java in the deep learning community. So Kesha, excited to have you here. How about you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Kesha Williams. I've been in IT for about 25 years, and I can definitely say I've built my career on being a Java software engineer. And so I've served in many roles, from a developer, technical lead, software engineering manager, always with a huge focus on Java. Um, Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I started just dabbling and playing around with machine learning on the side. And I always tell people, I remember the day that like the Java programming language was released, and I was doing C++ at the time. And when I researched Java, I just felt this excitement. And I said to myself, okay, this is the language I need to learn. It's going to take over the world. And so I actually left the company where I was working and I went to a corporation that allowed me to learn Java on the job. And that same excitement that I felt about Java many years ago, I feel today about machine learning. Like machine learning is going to take over the world. And so that's just a little bit about me. I have two passions, Java and machine learning.
No, that's awesome. I know, so from my career perspective, and I've had a love-hate relationship with Java probably for a good part of my programming career. And, part of, so I had it, I kind of jumped into the community to some extent, just in going through college and some of the courses there. Went to C Sharp and VB and doing some .NET stuff, and then jumped back into Java years later in the Hadoop community. So by any chance, that's kind of my background, so I'm definitely curious about that. Were you ever involved from the analytics perspective, doing any machine learning in the Java and Hadoop based community?
No, I actually got my start with one of the AWS services. So it was about 2017, and I wanted to just learn more about machine learning because I felt, the technology was exciting and scary at the same time. And so I really wanted to understand it. And I started using some of the AI services from AWS to just play around with the technology and really master it. And I came up with just this really cool use case because, the way I am, I learn by doing. So I actually have to have something that I'm building so I can learn as I build. And so my really fun use case came from a movie called Minority Report. And I don't know if you remember that movie, but it came out, I think, in 2002, and it starred Tom Cruise. And in that movie, they had this concept of pre-crime. And that's where the criminal was arrested right before they committed the crime because the police officers knew a crime was about to occur. And so my very first machine learning model was a crime predicting model that I modeled after pre-crime. And so I created that using AWS, machine learning services, and just that side project. I was able to speak on the TED stage about that through their Spotlight Presentation Academy, and I just started sharing my lessons learned with others by, continuing to speak and teaching workshops. And through all of that, I was recognized as an AWS machine learning hero, and like the rest is history because like that's just given me an even bigger platform to share my lessons learned with others.
No, that's it. That's so awesome. And one of the things that I talk about, and get a ton of questions from folks who are maybe just starting out in their journey, maybe even at the high school or at the collegiate level, saying, "Hey, I'm ready to get started." Or there are folks. So in my background, I was actually a web developer and positioned myself to kind of. I don't want to say restart my career, but kind of go in a different direction from a web developer into the analytics community, which is kind of pushed me towards the machine learning and deep learning. But the questions that I tend to get are, how do you get started? And that's an awesome story, saying that, hey, how you get started is you start just playing around with it, right, and start building applications and really kind of testing it out, and that kind of just puts you into the community, and then also gives you the ability to see, hey, is this something that I really like, right? Because it's not always fun, when you're refactoring or reprogramming that code for the 100th time, right?
Right.
To run to get just a point zero one better accuracy model. So for folks who are starting off, can you tell us a little more about that project? Did you for data sets and everything? I'm definitely interested. Did you use public available data sets, and kind of what was your thought process through that, building that application?
Yes. So I searched and searched. I spent weeks trying to find crime data that was actually public. And so I looked a lot in the US and I couldn't find any crime records, public crime records from the US. But I was lucky enough to find UK crime data. And so they published years of their stop and search data, and that's what I used to train the model. And so whenever they stopped someone, they indicated whether or not that stop led to an arrest. And they also detailed like all of the information, like the location, time of day, information about the person, their gender, their race, and all of that was public. So it's out. The data is out there from the UK, and so this crime model, it only works in the UK. So I have a really good understanding of how crime works over there, and I can tell you like when you should go on vacation and when you do, which areas to avoid. But it was a really fun project. But like you said, data is the most important piece of it. And so it took me a long time to find good data.
So how would you've been involved in the analytics community and machine learning. What about deep learning? Have you started to work towards getting into building models from that perspective?
Yes, I've definitely played around with deep learning through DJL, the Deep Java library. And deep learning it's a form of machine learning.
What are your thoughts using Java over Python or C++? So I know you have a background in Java. Have you seen some of the differences, or what if somebody's kind of coming and saying, hey, I want to get into deep learning, why would I want to use Java over Python or C++?
Well, when I look at the landscape, um, Java is a very popular programming language. And so we have more Java developers out there than, let's say, C++ developers or Python developers. And so when you think about just opening up the machine learning technology to this new set of developers, you can definitely use Java when you're using a framework or a library like DJL. And so for me as a Java developer, when I was first learning machine learning, like I had to learn Python. I didn't see anything else out there that I could use. And I can tell you to this day, whenever I write Python, I still try to put semicolons on the end of my lines of code, and like the indentation requirement for Python, like a compilation error because I didn't space it correctly. Like I still that still irritates me. And so when I think about just opening up the machine learning technology to Java developers. It's like you have this whole set of Java developers that can now easily um, play around or explore machine learning because they're not forced to learn Python or C++.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I never really thought about it from that perspective, where it's just that community, just being able to tap into the Java community. But as you were talking about it, it made me think too, like how many more applications, and I don't think anybody can say what that stat is, but there's so many applications that are in production that are actually in Java versus like Python. So there's
Right.
there's an open community here and an open source, an open portion of the applications that could start to implement this too. So you're talking about the DGL community to some extent. Can you tell me a little bit more around that? How did that project get started, and kind of where's it going right now?
Well, DJL, it stands for Deep Java Library, and it's an open source library that allows you to build and deploy deep learning in Java, and it was created by AWS. And I started playing around with it maybe in November of last year, and I was just as a Java developer, I was just super, super excited that I could go back to coding Java and explore machine learning. And for me, like the really cool thing about DJL is that it follows Java's motto of write once, run anywhere. So if you write code, it can run on any engine that you choose. And so I got started with Apache MXNet, but I believe it also supports TensorFlow and PyTorch. Um, but I think the introduction of DJL now it makes Java a very, very viable option for developing models using deep learning. And as far as the community, I know they've really started trying to build the community in March of this year, and there's an active Slack group. I'm a part of that group where people they post questions or challenges they're having, and the engineers are very responsive. There's a GitHub repo with a lot of examples to help you get started, and there's a pretty detailed website that has documentation and it just tells you more about the framework.
No, that's pretty awesome. So for any of the viewers or listeners who are out there who are looking to get started in the machine learning and deep learning community, where would you have them start? For the DGL. So say, hey, I'm going into Java. Is it jump into it on Slack, or what about the open source? Is there a good bit of contributions on that side too?
Yeah, so if you're going to get started with DJL, I would, of course, like you mentioned, assume that you already know Java. Um, and if you do, I would recommend like the very first use case would be integrating one of the pre-built models. So DJL has this model zoo where they have several models that they've already trained, like object detection, speech recognition. I would say start with trying to integrate one of those models into an existing application. And then once you master that and you understand how DJL works and you've mastered like the different terms, then I would recommend coming up with your own really cool, fun use case and train your model from scratch using your own data and creating this model to predict whatever outcome you desire. So that would be the path that I would recommend. And definitely look at the GitHub repo. They have great examples to help you get started. And then just reading up on their website about like the documentation about the API and how you use it. So that's what I would recommend.
No, that's awesome. And what about for data teams? Where are you seeing some of the most popular use cases? Is it, image detection? Is it natural language processing? Where are you seeing data teams starting to use the DGL community, or I'm sorry, the DGL uh, software library?
Well, I guess the neat thing about DJL, when you think about data and how you process and get your data ready for the machine learning process, um, DJL, it can handle pre and post data processing. And for example, my first use case, I used image classification. And so I created this really cool footwear classification system, and I presented about this at AWS reInvent. But within DJL, there's this term called a translator. And what that does, it like pre-processes images. And for example, it can resize images based on expected parameters, or it can convert images from color to grayscale. And so what I've just seen for data teams from a pre and post processing step, DJL really helps out with that. And another really neat thing, a thing that I really like about DJL when it talks about like teamwork, it allows data scientists and let's say Java engineers to work together. So for example, a data scientist can build a model using MXNet and Python, but then a Java engineer can consume, or what we call run inference on that model from within code using DJL. And just from like a use case perspective, the Amazon's retail system uses machine learning and DJL to make recommendations. And I believe they run it on Apache Spark with Scala. So that's a pretty big use case.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool. So kind of pulling in from Spark and then using DGL to do some of the deep learning. That's a very interesting use case.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool the things you can do.
So, as we're kind of coming to the close of this, I did want to. There's always some questions that folks in the community want to know about. So, I'm going to jump in and kind of ask these. So, the first, for folks getting started, and it doesn't have to be a programming book recommendation, but do you have a book recommendation? From could be a business book, or what's something you'd like to recommend to the audience?
So there is a pretty popular course that's taught at UC Berkeley, and there's a book. It's AWS's Deep Dive into Deep Learning. And I know that they're working on a Java version using DJL. And so that's the book that I would recommend. There is a preview that's available online. And after this, I can give you the link to post along with this. But
Yeah,
that's what I
definitely.
would.
I'll make sure that I put them all in the comment section here below, as well as the Slack and the GitHub repo, and anything else we need to kind of share with the community. Travel restrictions being what they are. I always try to ask about conferences, but the great thing is there's a ton of virtual conferences. So, what are some things or some upcoming things that you're looking forward to, or maybe even speaking at in the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, so I am speaking at Code Motion. There's an online conference coming up in October, and I will be speaking about machine learning. So that
Perfect.
is my next conference.
All right, and last but definitely not least, how can folks connect with you on social media, or YouTube, or just part of the community?
Sure. So on Twitter and Instagram, you can find me. It's at Kesha, Kesha Wills, Willz. So Kesha Wills. And then on LinkedIn, I did not use my real name. Sometimes I wish I had. But on LinkedIn, you can find me at Java Rockstar Kesha. It's easy to remember.
That's awesome. Well, so any parting words before we leave here for the community?
I would just say it is a super, super exciting time to be in tech. When I look at the cloud and I look at AWS and I look at all of the AI services and I look at DJL, it just makes a lot of all like these complex technologies approachable. And so I just say go explore, go build, and learn something new.
Well, thanks again for being on the Big Data, Big Questions channel today, and a lot of knowledge coming out around the Java, and then things that I didn't even realize as far as the Java deep learning community. So I really appreciate the time. Thanks again.
My pleasure.